Thanks for joining me in episode 5 of the Record Collectors Club Conversations podcast. And this week, I'm joined by an incredibly talented artist and illustrator, Ben O'Brien, or better known as Ben the Illustrator. So Ben's work first caught my eye when he started to produce his cover versions illustrations, which are famous record sleeves, and that has led him to work with some amazing bands and artists such as The Cure, Tim Burgess and Sparks. So welcome to the podcast, Ben.
Thanks a lot, man. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Thanks for joining us. So let's jump into the cover versions idea. So how did that start and when did it start?
So it was in 2020, so lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
What was it, March 2020 or so that we all went into lockdown? At the time, most of my clients were like travel illustration, and I had some regular jobs, I had a few big jobs on, and literally everything got cancelled. Every job I had on. Because it was all travel companies, no one knew what they were doing. So I was kind of at a bit of a loss as to what to do. So I was kind of like trying to be okay with that. I mean, there was a lot going on in the world. And, but in our house, I had to focus, my son started homeschooling, all that kind of stuff. And, but I knew I needed something. So I was kind of playing around with a few ideas of like, how can I fill my time sort of thing? And then I was walking the dog, and it was really early. Well, I always get up really early. It was really early in the morning, and I was listening to Massive Attack, the first Blue Lions first album, and I just kind of I was thinking about the cover, and I was thinking, oh my God, I love that cover. Do you know what I mean? And then I was like, I could kind of do. I sort of saw how I could. Because it's quite graphic, it's quite symmetrical. Obviously, it's got texture to it or whatever else. But I kind of thought, well, maybe I could just do a little version of that kind of thing. And I pictured it in my mind how I'd kind of create it. And then essentially, I just kind of went home and did it, sort of thing. And I was like, that was satisfying. And I put it on, I don't know, Instagram, Twitter, whatever. And people were like, oh, that's cool. And it just felt like a nice thing to do. And then later, I think the same day, I'm not entirely sure, but I think the same day I thought, I noticed another album cover and I thought, well, I could probably do that as well then, sort of thing. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. Yeah. And people were getting really into it. And then people were kind of, playing like guessing which covers they were. Because sometimes I break them down to something very graphic. And I don't put text on it. So you can't see, there's no titling, or if the design is mostly text, then it's, for me, that's just shapes, so you can't read it. And they just picked up and people got really into it. And then I was kind of lucky because everyone was at home so much and people were, I don't know, must have been thinking differently or whatever, but a couple of people asked if I could sell them as prints. And I was a bit unsure because when you start doing prints, you got to like set up an online store or whatever. You've got to get them printed first and that kind of thing. And I was like, well, I don't really want to, be out of pocket at a time like that. Yeah. So I did a couple of tests, I think. And and they seemed to pick up and people started buying them. I was like, okay, this is good. And because people were at home, there was a lot of people were buying them to have in the background on their Zoom calls for people who are working at home. I think people were also spending a bit of money on not necessarily home improvement, but making the house nice or updating the house a bit. So it kind of it all kind of rolled on from there.
Okay, yeah, because I mean, obviously during lockdown we had nowhere to go. We had not really a great deal to spend our money on, apart from, as you say, things that you could do in the house. So I mean, I spent a lot of money on records. Yeah, that's just the way it was because we couldn't go anywhere. So Massive Attack was the first one that you drew then, and is that the kind of, obviously later on down the line we'll talk about your kind of musical taste, but is that the kind of music that you listen to quite often? It's like, I mean, Massive Attack's trip.
Yeah, I mean, Massive Attack. I kind of, I listen to all sorts, but Massive Attack's one of those bands. It's always been there, always been a favourite. I have the barcode from blue lines I have as a tattoo on my back.
All right. That's
It
cool.
doesn't work. You can't scan it. But it's there and I know what it is. Um, so yeah, massive attack. Yeah, I like everything they do, but those first few albums are
Yeah.
especially, special to me, sort of thing.
Yeah. Are you so whereabouts in the UK are you based?
We're in Somerset.
Okay, so you're not far from
London,
Bristol,
London
where
originally, but we're in Somerset now. Yeah, so we're
yeah,
near Bristol. We're not far
so you're
from
near
Bristol
Bristol,
at
so
all.
that's obviously a massive tech one.
Yeah.
Okay, and then in terms of the series of cover versions now, how do you know how many you're up to? How many have you produced?
To be honest, I don't, because some of them I've redone, some of them I've done and I'm not allowed to show.
Hmm.
Some of them I've just done for fun, really, but for myself, and I can't
Yeah.
even put them online because there's like legal things with certain album covers and stuff.
Okay.
Um, but we're somewhere between 150 and 200
Wow.
at them. Yeah, I'm not making them as frequently as I was kind
Yeah.
of 2 or 3 years ago. But I try and make like a couple of new sets every year now, just to keep it interesting.
Mm.
And also there's always like a few gaps, like there's quite a lot of Beatles. Well, I've got a lot of Beatles ones, but I still haven't done all of them.
Yeah.
So I need to do a few. I need to get, at some point finish off those ones.
Okay. So do you have any favorites that you've created?
Um, yeah, I like. So the first Chemical Brothers album, Exit Planet Dust, is a real
Mm.
favorite for me.
Yeah.
It's a favorite album anyway, but the way the cover looks, I really like.
Yeah.
There's Patti Smith, just because it's really simple.
Hmm.
I've forgotten what the album's called. Horses?
Horses, yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. I really like that one. It's very simple. There's one of the specials, which I really like. Weirdly, I really like the black and white ones a lot.
Yeah.
Um, the specials one's good as well because I kind of weirdly ended up sort of connected with Horace, who plays the bass in the
Uh-huh.
specials.
Yeah, yeah.
So I've met him now, kind
Oh,
of thing through doing that. We've kind of got to know each other a bit. Yeah, there's a Dylan one I really like. Highway 61
mhm.
Revisited.
Revisited, yeah.
That's a bit of a favorite. Just the way it looks, I just think it looks cool,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
So then,
Um,
just sorry to interrupt. Just so when you're picking these records, then or you're thinking about which ones you're doing. Obviously, you're a very visual person anyway because you're an illustrator. Is there any sort of ground rules or anything like that you kind of think, well, I can do that one, but I can't do that one? You mentioned text before. I don't
yeah,
think, yeah,
if there's a lot of text, sometimes it just doesn't work.
yeah,
But I mean, sometimes there's one. So Paul Weller, Heavy Soul. So
mm,
I've done that and it works because it just comes out as like two big shapes.
yeah,
But then sometimes I've tried to do text ones, but you can't tell what it is. Like you can't, no matter how close the colors are or whatever,
mm,
you can't tell what album cover it is. And I
mm.
kind of feel like that didn't work, sort of thing. Um, yeah, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. No, I can understand how difficult it is. Obviously, again, this is the whole podcast is all about records really and
Mm,
record collecting and that's a key thing when I've spoken to record collectors. It's a visual thing because they're holding
mm,
these tangible items in their hand,
yeah,
and I assume you obviously your prints are doing that same thing, so you've got to kind of understand and tell what it is. Obviously, I assume people will buy, say, a Bob Dylan print because they like Bob Dylan. They
yeah,
won't just buy it off the back of, well, it's a really nice album, Steve. I tend to think that anyway, but
yeah. No,
okay.
I think mostly because like when people order a few, you totally get almost what kind of person they are by their
Yeah, absolutely.
selection.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and people do collect, all the charlatans ones or
Uh-huh.
whatever. Yeah.
It's just like being a record collector, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mentioned in the introduction that obviously you've worked with Tim Burgess, and Tim, again, is a record collector. He champions everything about music, and
Mm.
again, going back to lockdown, he obviously did the lockdown parties for albums. Is that how did you kind of get onto working with Tim, and then onto obviously Kendall Calling, which is a festival he is there at every year. I've seen him
Yeah.
there, so yeah.
Um, well, it kind of, well, so yeah, so I really like, when he was doing the Twitter listening parties,
Yeah.
that was great. So I was kind of like just following them.
Yeah.
And then think he tweeted something, and it was that Twitter were going to let him have an emoji, like a hashtag emoji. So you'd put the hashtag, and then there'd be a little image. And so I'd done a couple of emojis before then for Twitter. So I kind of sent him a message, and I just said, well, if there's any chance you want someone to design an emoji, I've kind of, I've got previous, if you like. And but he already had one. He already had something done.
Okay.
By Pete Fowler, who's an amazing artist.
Oh yeah.
He'd designed a book cover or two for Tim beforehand. But then Tim was like, well, although if you want to do something else, kind of thing, because Tim just likes to kind of pick people up that make things or whatever. And they were in the process of building the website for the listening parties, and he said, do you want to? Have you got a few illustrations you could put on there or anything like that? And so I did like a set of, I can't remember, 4, 5, 6 illustrations, and it was all people in their homes, like with their phone, obviously following a listening party, records all around them and that kind of thing. And he really liked them, and I was putting the cover versions into the scenes, sort of thing. And it just kind of grew from there. And so I ended up doing a few other things with him, kind of over those few years. Sometimes with cover version stuff, sometimes with illustration stuff. And when he started hosting listening parties and that kind of thing, and the Tim Peaks stuff. So Tim Peaks is, it's a specific stage at Kendall. But he does Tim Peaks things at other festivals as well. And he said, any chance of an illustration to just promote it online and that kind of thing. So I did a few, and that was all good. I just like doing it, and like the people I've connected with through Tim, some of the best people I've met, sort of thing, because it's mostly like music lovers, people who work in music, or they work in illustration, but it's something about music or whatever. So I kind of connected with my kind of people, or same as you, our kind of people. And then so Tim, last year they were doing something at Blue Dot, and I did an illustration for them, and we were trying to work out if there was some reason I could go up to Blue Dot and do something with them, but I can't remember why we didn't. Maybe it just got too late to organise anything. And so Tim said quite early after last summer, okay, Kendall calling next year, let's do something. And I had no idea what we were going to do. And then he gave me a message probably early this year, saying, do you want to come up to Kendall calling, stay the whole time and just draw it, just document everything going on. And so I did, sort of thing. And so I spent the weekend there, met all of his team at Tim Peaks and everything. Saw all the bands that were playing at Tim Peaks and that kind of thing. So I was drawing, the bands, but then also drawing like the coffee van and, people just hanging out and the kids playing outside and that kind of thing. So now I've got like a big sketchbook full of illustrations. I'm working, like, when I can get the time, working on like color artworks of them. And then, hopefully we're going to do something similar next year or build it up to something else.
Brilliant.
Kind of got lots of ideas flying around.
That's excellent. Okay. Kendall Colin's a great festival. I've been a couple of times before. And the Tim Peaks Cafe as well is really cool, because they have the secret sets, don't they? Like, I think I've seen Libertines there and stuff like that. So brilliant. So then just moving on to another project then that you've worked on, had when I was looking on your website, In My Room. That's again to do with vinyl records, isn't it? That's vinyl movements.
I don't know. I can't really remember how that started, but there's a gallery in Leamington Spa called Snap Gallery. They've got a bricks and mortar thing, but I think they probably sell more online, And they mostly deal in photography, so like band photography and that kind of thing. They have some amazing collections of photos. And but Guy, who runs that, got in touch, and he was like, I've seen your cover versions. And originally it was that, well, they still are doing it, but so they sell like limited prints of the cover versions, but they're bigger. They're mostly 24 inches, but there's some of them are 36 inches.
Wow.
And they're printed on Chroma-Lux, so it's like on a kind of a metal sheet sort of thing. So they, so it's kind of, because, my cover versions aren't that expensive sort of thing, but this is for like your higher end music collectors. So he reproduces the cover versions as these big kind of Chroma-Lux prints. And then there was a guy who had collected quite a few of them, and then I can't remember exactly, but I think he wanted almost like a portrait of himself amongst his record collection.
Mm.
I think that's how it came about. And so Guy said, is this something we could do, sort of thing. And so I did a couple of like kind of proposal versions of how it could be done. And we ended up with this concept of it being like from the ceiling
Yeah.
and someone like basically lying on the ground surrounded by their records and that kind of thing. And then Guy, so we did that first one, and then Guy kind of put it out as a as a commission thing, so people can come to him. It's mostly done for gifts, sort of thing. So
Uh-huh.
building up for Christmas and that kind of thing. So they'll send photos of their partner or whatever, tell us what the favorite album covers are, and then I'll kind of create the scene, and then Guy gets it printed, and
Oh,
and they get it from him.
that's excellent. I mean, like I say, I've seen the examples on the website. I don't think I could pick 10 favorite records to do. It'd be so difficult.
Yeah, I could never. I thought of something recently that I really must work out what my 100 favorite albums are, sort of thing. Because I've got a few that I know. I know they'd be in it,
Yeah.
but then there's things like there's some bands like how would you choose one or two
Yeah.
when they've got 12 albums and
That's
that
it.
kind of thing.
Yeah, that's it. God, it's be so
Yeah.
difficult. I can pick my number one, and when anybody asks me that, I pick number one, but I couldn't pick anything else. It's just so
Right.
difficult.
What's your number one then?
Darkness on the Edge of Town, Bruce Springsteen.
All right. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm a bit of well, everybody knows I'm a bit of a Springsteen obsessive. So, yeah. So then you mentioned the emojis before,
Mm.
and obviously, again, on your social media, Twitter particularly, I've seen that really famous people have used your emojis. I mean, like Elton John and The
Mm.
Cure have used it recently to promote the anniversary of Wish. That was right,
Yeah,
wasn't it?
yeah.
How did that come about? Did they approach you? Did you approach them? What was the kind of
Yeah, it was Elton John first, and so it was for his autobiography was coming out.
Yeah.
They Pan Macmillan is the publishers,
Hmm.
and their kind of marketing department were trying to work out, what's a nice way to promote it or whatever. And they were looking at social media. They knew that they had to kind of have a good campaign on social media, and so someone there, don't know who, had the idea of kind of an Elton John Twitter emoji sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it would be like if it was like hashtag Elton John, it would attach the emoji.
Uh-huh.
And there's a woman called Katie who works at Pan Macmillan who knew my work, and she was like, could you do a tiny, tiny little thing? And I never, like, I can illustrate a face,
Yeah.
because I'm an illustrator, it's what I do. But it was a whole other thing when you realize how tiny it is,
Hmm.
how you kind of work out what level of detail it is and that
Yeah.
kind of thing. So yeah, we did Elton John, and I came up with loads of them. And I mean, they had no specific thing of what era Elton it should
Mm.
be and all that kind
Mm.
of thing. And there's some eras that when you kind of like illustrate it, no matter how well you do it, and then you shrink it down, you can't really tell what it is.
Okay.
And so, but there's sort of whereas like, rainbow glasses, star-shaped glasses,
Yeah.
you can make that small and you know what it is.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I came up with quite a few of them. And then we went through this insane process. Like normally if I work for a publisher, let's say, there'll be a team of people there and they okay it. And,
Mm.
if there's a book, then they might have to go to the writer, but it doesn't always. But whereas, when you're dealing with Elton John's image, it can't just, they've got no authority to check off his image.
Yeah.
But David Furnish does. So
Right.
he's in charge of Elton's image.
Wow.
So there was one kind of nervous night where they'd sent it to David, and then we were all kind of waiting for the next morning for David Furnish to give us the okay. And he did. And yeah, so that was so the Elton John one was first. And then since then I've done a Mariah Carey one, which
Oh,
is
wow.
another like mad experience because she's got a whole team of people that govern her image. Do you know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had to have a call with all of them. I mean, that's a weird experience sort of thing. But yeah, I probably shouldn't say because it's, you
Yeah.
know,
No, it's fine. Yeah.
there's contracts, but it was fun. Yeah, and then there's been some of them were through Tim actually,
Okay.
through listening parties. So we did a David Bowie one for when it was the Ziggy Stardust
Yeah.
anniversary. Would that have been 50 years, I think? Must
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
been.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so we did one for that. We did, which I mean, kind of worked with the David Bowie estate on that. We did one for Blondie, which was really cool
Mm.
because because kind of Debbie Harry and Chris Stein signed, they signed it off, so that was cool.
So,
Um, yeah, and the Cure one as well. I think that's kind of it. But
yeah.
yeah, no, it's good. Annoyingly, of course, when Twitter changed, all the people we knew have left. So
Yeah.
that's not a thing anymore, being
Right.
able to do Twitter emojis. But it was fun while it lasted.
That's it. Okay, obviously we've mentioned plenty of times now you're an illustrator. So going back to the beginning then, did you always know you wanted to be in illustration and how did that, how did your career evolve and then it became your own business? What was the story behind that?
Yeah. Yeah, I pretty much, I mean, it was all I could do. Do you know what I mean? Like when you go through school,
Mm. Yeah.
art was the only thing I was any good at, really. And so I knew I kind of wanted to go that something in art. I mean, probably as a kid, I didn't really know what an illustrator was.
No.
Um, but, and then I did like a foundation course at college, and then I wanted to do music videos. So I studied animation in the end because this
Right.
was kind of like mid 90s and there was
Mhm.
like so much cool stuff going on, like,
Yeah.
like Chemical Brothers videos and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, so I studied animation, and then towards the end of when I was, oh no, so after I graduated, my long story, but my mum was in hospital
Mhm.
for 6 months or so. My dad was severely disabled, so I moved back home and
Mhm.
to care for him while my mum was in hospital herself. And so that gave me this kind of 6 month period where I couldn't go and work, sort of thing. I would have just been in London and looking for a job. But I
Yeah.
had this 6 month period where I couldn't work. And so I was like, okay, what can I do? I've got to do something. And so I started like sending off animation show reels to record labels, sending, portfolio things to, record labels or like club nights and that kind of thing. And I started getting a bit of work doing flyers and posters and that kind of thing, and a few odd bits of animation. And then that kind of led into getting a couple of music video commissions, sort of thing. And then after kind of 6 months to a year, I kind of moved back to London. I was like, well, I'm going to see how long this lasts working for
Mhm.
myself,
Yeah.
which I don't really recommend. When you're like 20, I don't recommend moving to
Yeah.
London and working for yourself. But I'd already had this little, foundation year while I was at my mum and dad's house looking after dad. Um, and also because both my parents were self-employed their whole working lives. So it kind of seemed almost like the way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And then, yeah, and then I sort of carried on working with music videos and I did some stuff for Sony and I did some stuff for Skint Records, and a few other random things.
Mhm.
And I was still doing, odd bits of other stuff. I was still like freelancing for people or doing like just cash money jobs, whatever I could get. And then I ended up working on a music video with a few people that I got along really well with. And we started a little animation studio in London. Um, it just kind of like happened kind of nicely, organically sort of thing. And then we worked together for a couple of years. We did some like kids TV stuff. We did literally anything we could get.
Mhm.
Kids TV stuff. This is early 2000s, so early kind of web animation and that kind of thing. Yeah, and it was all going on well, but I kind of got so like running a studio. I was too young to be running a studio. Do you know what I mean? Running a studio,
Yeah.
and the animation production process is like a bit overwhelming, sort of thing. And I just found myself just being, I was like producer, runner. We were running our own company, so we're doing the accounts ourselves and all
Mhm.
that kind of thing. And I was exhausted. And then I'd been doing a few bits of illustration, so purely like focusing on how it looks, not worrying about this whole production process that you get with animation. And I was like, look, I can't do this anymore with the studio. And so I left that job and basically started kind of selling myself as an illustrator. But because I'd been working at the studio for a couple of years, I had a few contacts
Okay.
already. So
Yeah.
I had people to kind of get work from. And it just kind of built up from there, really. I've always I like the kind of the slightly renegade way of doing everything yourself and being your own boss.
Mm.
And I'm now at a point where I don't know any different. I don't know any other way. I couldn't get a job. I don't even know how you do.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And how many years has that been into sort of in total then?
it's been 20. 5 years
Oh,
self-employed and about 20 years as an illustrator.
brilliant.
Yeah.
And okay, then. So talking about kind of some influences in your illustration career, I've recently just picked up this book,
Oh
which
yeah.
yeah, which I saw that you said that you were into. I've picked that up. So again, I'm a designer by trade as well, so I'm always into looking at books and things like that and
Mm.
inspiration and things. So, a couple of influences in your career. Then, does anybody in terms of illustration or art or things like that?
Yeah. Weirdly, not really illustration much, I
Yeah.
reckon. Like growing up, it was always like Warhol and Keith
Mm.
Haring and Basquiat and people like that. And then probably like when I was around kind of college or leaving college time, there was lots of like people like Takeshi Murakami and and that kind of thing. And also like those kind of early days of Kaws and Banksy and people like
Mm.
that. So street art's always played a big part in
Yeah.
what I like. I also really like vintage packaging and that kind of
Okay.
thing. Like, like 50s candy packaging and that kind of thing. I got, that's what most of my art books are probably, vintage packaging
Mm.
or vintage posters and that kind of thing. Um, yeah, and album covers sort of thing. I mean,
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah.
that was the most visual thing when I was a kid. My mum and dad both had a lot of vinyl as well. And so it was just kind of looking at that. It wasn't always just looking at the cover
Mm.
because it might just be a photo or something, but it was looking at like the logos, looking at the typography. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was all that kind of stuff. And because so my dad was really into like David Bowie, Bob Dylan, that kind of thing,
Mhm.
Rolling Stones, and my mum was pretty much exclusively into jazz. So we
Okay.
had a lot of jazz records,
Ah.
and that was like super influential.
Yeah.
And it was also because like that for me that was important because that led me getting into hip hop when I was pretty young. And that's for me, that's like there's a cultural thing there that's really
Mm.
important. I
Mm.
feel educated by that music,
Yeah.
like jazz, soul, hip hop. Um, yeah. And it was all the visual influences of that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, just on the shelf up there behind me, there's a book on Blue Note Records and the
Right,
artwork
yeah.
of Blue Note Records and the process that the photographers and the typography and things have gone through there. That's a really good book. Yeah, I'd recommend that. Highly recommend that. Okay, then so that obviously your music seems to be a kind of constant throughout your illustration career rather than just on your life
Mm.
as well. Do you have records yourself? Have you got your own collection or?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have, right, there's a whole load that's still like up in the loft.
Uh-huh.
And there's also been a few times in my life where I've had to sell a lot, sell a lot for the cash
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. So I was really lucky. So kind of, I don't remember either 2020 or 2021 when I was working with Tim. I started working with Tim, and we designed a turntable for Rega
Uh-huh. Yeah.
with the cover versions with
Yep.
loads of them,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I think Rega made 8 of them, so it was like a limited thing.
Mm.
Um, and so we got that. And at the time, we didn't have a turntable sort of thing because basically my old one broke and we'd never been able to, we hadn't rebought one.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we were kind of gifted this turntable and it sort of changed everything.
Excellent.
So we were like, okay, yeah, we can finally buy records again, pull a load of records out of the boxes and that kind of thing. And so now like Sunday mornings, normally just be putting records on and
Mhm.
that kind of thing. Yeah, so because I feel like I maybe lost my way a little bit when we didn't have a turntable, we
Yeah.
weren't buying records and that kind of thing. But I feel like kind of like back on earth now.
So where do you have you got a local record shop that you shop at? Where do you shop the records normally?
Yeah, well, we shop anyway, but yeah, 'cause where we live, Frome, there's a record shop called Raves from the Graves,
Yeah,
which
I
is
heard of it, yeah.
sort of thing. And so you can kind of find anything in there pretty
Mm.
much. I don't spend enough time like trawling through secondhand shops enough anymore, as
Mhm.
much as I used to. I mean, partly because you don't always have the cash, I don't know, when you've got kids and a mortgage, you
Yeah, yeah.
don't, yeah. But whereas I used to just throw all my money away on records. Yeah, so there's a rough trade shop in Bristol, which is really
Mhm.
good. But then also, whenever we go anywhere, we always seem to come back with lots of records. In fact, we had to. So my wife's Australian,
Mhm.
and we went to Melbourne at Easter, sort of thing. We
Right.
don't get her mum's still over there. We don't get to go back very often. And it's the first time we've been back in 6, 7 years, I think. And when we were coming back, we had to repack our suitcase because it was too heavy because of the records, and they had to give me a special bag to carry the records in, so we could bring them back. But yeah, we'll just yeah, wherever we go, try and pick up a record
Yeah.
here. Yeah.
Okay. And then just in terms of music that's been out this year, then I've been asking a few people this that have come on the podcast. Is there any favorite bands or artists that you're currently enjoying that have kind of like stood out?
There's a few. What have we done? I mean, there's a few like because I was at Kendal Calling. There's a band called Taffy, who are a
Okay.
Japanese band. They're awesome. I had never heard of them before, and then you kind of see them. And if you ever get to like, they'll be on YouTube and stuff.
Hmm.
The most infectious drummer you have ever seen, sort of thing. He
Right.
just will not stop smiling. Like he obviously just adores playing the drums.
Yeah.
They're really good. There's an Aussie band called Girl and Girl that we saw only a few weeks ago at End of the Road Festival.
Oh, yeah.
I think they've only just released their first album. I'm not sure. They're really good. Very Australian.
Uh-huh.
And because my wife's from Melbourne, I kind of get it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's what else am I enjoying? There's a band called Crumb, who are another Australian one, who I really like. Although they can't, I wanted to buy their album on vinyl while we were in Melbourne, and I asked in one shop, and he was like, "Oh no," and he's like, "They do make vinyl, but it's like you have to speak to the right people, sort of thing." And he kind of like told me, he's like, "If you go to this record shop and you ask them kind of quietly, they might be able to get you a copy." Thing like. I don't know if they just don't print many or
Yeah.
if they're kind of trying to be elusive. I don't know. But yeah, Crumb are really cool.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Um, yeah, we kind of trying to think who like we listen to music a lot as a family and we try and do a lot of festivals and that kind of thing. I think CMAT, like the big things people know, CMAT's like our big family one at the minute. Yeah, she's great. We saw her at End of the Road as well.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I was at End of the Road as well. It was funny
Oh,
because,
right.
yeah, I interviewed a band called the Moonlight Parade on the last episode of the podcast.
Mm.
And they were there as well, and now you were there, and it's strange. I mean, I live up in the northeast, so it's so
Yeah,
far
yeah,
from me to go, and it's the first time I've ever went. CMAT was absolutely incredible. Like
yeah.
the atmosphere in the field that afternoon was just bonkers. How
It
great
was
she
good, wasn't it?
was! Just such a good entertainer. Great festival
Yeah.
as well. Okay, then we're just running out a little bit of time, so I'll ask a question that I've been asking everybody. Have you got sort of a favorite album of the year so far?
Um, well, okay, like my obvious one, just because I've listened to it to death. There's a band called Middle Kids, another Australian band.
Hmm.
They released their second album this year. That's really good. They kind of like they make the exact sort of indie music I like, where it's kind of like upbeat, but you could
Yeah,
have a little cry. Do you
yeah.
know what I mean? Like there's something emotional in it. That's really good. I think I think Kim Deal got a new album coming out. That's what I'm waiting for.
Potentially.
I've seen something that she's had a few tracks out recently, but like a solo album.
Okay.
I don't think it's out yet, so I can't recommend that. But yeah, definitely the Middle Kids
Yeah.
album. Common and Pete Rock had a really good album this year.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah,
Again,
I think,
it's been a great year for music.
yeah,
I keep saying this, and every year I try and do over on Twitter for the last few years, 5 or 6 years. I've been doing a favorite 25 albums of the year. Then a couple of years ago, it went to 50, and now I don't even think I could pick 50 this year. It's been such an insane year for music, and we're getting so spoiled. But
mm,
yeah, it's been brilliant. So. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming on the podcast, Ben. It's been brilliant to chat to you for half an hour this afternoon. And yeah, I'll keep following your illustration career with a keen eye because you literally do the stuff that I like as well. Like, I mean, the album covers things
cool.
obviously it sells itself with me because I'm such a big music fan and record fan. So, but yeah, looking forward to seeing more stuff that you produce.
Cool. Thanks a lot, man. Yeah, thanks for having
Brilliant.
me on. That's great.
No problem at all.